Hi everyone, it's Gary here, and very warm welcome back to the fourth official here on YouTube. Joining me today on this very special preview of the upcoming Champions League playoff tie between Rangers and Club Brugge from the Belgian Football Podcast. It is Scott Coyne. Scott, very warm welcome to the fourth official.
Thanks, Gary. It's nice to be here.
Yep, we're very glad that you are here. Regular viewers to the channel will know that we do this now quite regularly in terms of getting experts in from alternative podcast platforms to give us a bit more of a in-depth look at potential opponents and obviously big high-stakes game coming up over the course of the next 10 days or so between Rangers and Club Brugge. Best part of, say, £50 million on the line in terms of that Champions League qualification. And it's one of those where, if you look at the start of the season that Rangers have had, Club Brugge will probably be looking at it going into the game as slight favourites.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, Club Brugge are a side that have made the group stage in the league phase for 6 out of the last 7 years. So they're now a side that, have been appearing consistently at this level. And in the 1 year in which they didn't make it, they played Conference League football and they reached the semi-finals of the Conference League that year. So they went quite close to going all the way in that tournament. So, top flight European football and going reasonably deep in it is something that they've become accustomed to doing. And that's helped them kind of stay ahead generally of the opposition in Belgium and obviously given them a big financial advantage over their domestic competition as well. So they realise the importance of performing at this level regularly and performing well.
Yeah, we've seen obviously that from a Scottish football perspective, the riches that have been able to be awarded to Celtic over the course of the last 10 years or so by consistently being at the top table of European football. And whilst I think Rangers have done very, very well over the course of the last kind of 5-6 years at Europa League level, Champions League is very different playing field. And obviously the last time that Rangers were there struggled massively. And what was that, a very difficult group, let's be said, with Liverpool, Napoli and Ajax in there. However, I think the worry from the way that Rangers have started this season is that maybe the team at very early stages of Russell Martin's tenure might not be quite ready for that top tier of European football, although the financial benefits of getting there could make a huge difference in terms of being able to maybe attract more players that can play the way that Russell Martin wants to play.
Yeah, I think the main concern from a Rangers perspective is whether this particular tie has perhaps just come slightly too early for them. I mean, we'll find out. Bruges are very comfortable with this level of football and have kind of become accustomed to it. And in fact, it was interesting listening a little bit to Nicky Hines' post-match comments after the win against Salzburg the other day, where he said the performance in the second half was very much the level that they're going to need to hit in order to win the playoff round and to secure their place in the league phase proper. Because in truth, up until that second half, that tie was very much in the balance. Bruges got themselves in head, and then Salzburg had managed to turn it around, and they needed to make a number of kind of tactical changes at half time in that game, really to get it over the line. So Bruges are a side who tend to start the season a little bit slower than maybe their fans would like. The thing about Belgium is, because of the playoff system there and the halving of points, which comes into play with the playoffs, then you can afford a slightly slow start as long as you're in the mix for the majority of the regular season. But usually they turn up when it comes to Europe, and they've been performing kind of consistently well there. I think they know that it's important for a club of their size's profile, and obviously, as you were saying, the financial benefits of that are something that, in a strategic sense, in terms of your operations, have implications that really are long term if you can secure that. And sometimes just being there is enough. not necessarily having the impact once you're there, almost doesn't matter sometimes. I think it's what simply being there allows you to do in terms of your operations, and that's the real win of it. It's about attracting different players, it's about increasing revenue, it's about developing players, and the value of it is very difficult. I mean, obviously there's the round about 50 million for just kind of getting there, but then there's big financial rewards, for winning fixtures and even drawing them once you're in it. So it's important on a number of levels, and it's important to kind of be consistently in it. And I think Club Brugge are probably a good example from Rangers' perspective of a club who, aren't necessarily that big. Rangers are the far bigger club in terms of their draw and the size of their supporter base, but Club Brugge show what's possible. If you follow a certain model and you put that
properly.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if your footballing strategy and operations kind of are working well, then it shows that because Club Brugge are not, they're well known obviously outside Belgium, but I think it'd be fair to say they're not a big club as such. And in terms of their history and culture, they only really become a player in Belgian footballing history in the 1970s. Up until then, Club Brugge really weren't a player on the Belgian football scene. So it's only through winning a number of titles in the 70s and 80s that the club has allowed itself to build, and winning a number of league titles and securing Champions League football regularly has really helped that club develop a kind of stratospheric development sort of particularly over the last 10 years. But they're a good example of what's possible, with smart choices and good people and key footballing operations.
In terms of that slowish start to the season so far, Scott, for Club Brugge, 3 league games played so far, 2 wins against Genk and city rivals Cercle Brugge, and then a defeat away to Mechelen, maybe slightly surprising, and then obviously that tie against RB Salzburg, which I think when we saw the draw coming out, I think from a Rangers perspective, we probably wanted to be that side of the draw as opposed to the Nice Benfica side of the draw. However, RB Salzburg and Bruges appear to be quite well matched in terms of probably on a kind of similar playing field.
Yeah, it was a reasonably closely kind of fought tie. I think Salzburg are not quite as good a side as they were maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but they still are a very decent outfit. And I think Club Brugge knew that they were going to have to perform pretty well to get through that tie in the end, and they managed to do that. They've started the domestic season kind of quite well. They're sitting just 1 point off the top at the moment, so they're right in the mix of where they want to be. They have a league fixture to fulfil today before they travel to Glasgow against Zulte Waregem, and I think they would be expected to get 3 points there as well. And they've started the season pretty well, actually. I mean, that defeat to Mechelen was a slight surprise, not a huge one really. Mechelen are kind of quite strong at home. And getting Club Brugge at home early in the season was kind of good from their point of view in terms of the way the fixtures fell. And obviously Club had a big European game against Salzburg coming up as well, so they'd made a number of changes and had probably one eye on that. But yeah, they've started well, and they have a good relationship with their coach at the moment. He's been there a little while and achieved quite a lot in the relatively short time that he's been there as well.
Obviously, the Salzburg game during the week on Tuesday night, having to come from behind, Salzburg were 2-0 up in that tie, but then 3 second-half goals, including a very late winner from Hans Van Aken. Van Aken appears to be the kind of star man in that Bruges midfield. But is that a kind of style that Bruges have got in terms of that ability to come from behind, and they've got a bit of grit about them?
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of grit about them. I think Nikica likes to play a kind of 4-2-3-1 formation. So really, what he's all about is kind of dominant possession-based football, and this is where the similarities between Club Brugge and Rangers are interesting. Club would be expected to dominate possession, and really kind of take the initiative, certainly in domestic football, in a similar way to Rangers would. But the emphasis really with Nicky Hyen and his football's on kind of quick transitions. So often when they're in possession, they'll switch to a 3-4-3, and look for overloads. Find the width out wide as well, get the wingers overlapping, using advancing fullbacks as well. So there's a lot of flexibility and interchanging of certain positions that go in there, which can be kind of difficult for opposition sides to kind of deal with. So it's about, being quick and direct and looking to exploit space in behind by moving the ball quickly and working those rapid transitions. So, dominating the transitions and a high press, particularly in kind of that final third. So, yeah, watch out for, fast wingers and, technically strong strikers that Bruges tend to have as well. Nicky Hyen's got a very good win ratio at Bruges as well. I think it's around 60%, so it's a good bit better than some of his recent predecessors.
Obviously, we got a bit of a preview of Club Brugge in the summer pre-season friendly, played at Ibrox very early in the Rangers pre-season. Maybe difficult to read too much into a pre-season game, but certainly that first half, Bruges looked very, very strong. Managed to get into a 2-goal lead with a very excellent goal from Ludovic Rice, who scored an absolute cracker from the edge of the box on his debut. I think it was for Bruges on that day at Ibrox. Obviously, a lot of changes made second half, and Rangers then obviously were able to come back into a 2-2 draw on the day. But can't really read too much into that much in a pre-season friendly. However, what Rangers would have got is sight of what Bruges can do to you if you are giving the ball away and giving away chances. And I think that's one thing that certainly we've noticed from the start of the season from a Rangers perspective is the number of opportunities that have been afforded to the opposition, both domestically and in European football. Over 100 shots on the Rangers goal so far this season, which is frightening, really. Jack Butland started the season really good form, and we've needed them to get through the ties against Panathinaikos and Victoria Pilsen during the week. But Bruges are a level up, I think, from certainly Pilsen, and they've certainly got a bit more clinicalism in terms of their kind of strikers. And you give up some of the opportunities that I think we gave up to Pilsen during the week to Club Brugge, then they're not going to be as profligate with those chances, and that's going to be a lot more difficult to try and maintain. So I think Bruges will certainly be encouraged, I think, by the way Rangers have started in terms of from that defensive shape perspective and giving up opportunities to the opposition.
Yeah, I think the thing with this Bruges side is that there are goals right across it. And because of the interchangeable ability of the offensive players, then Nicky Hyen's got a lot of options there, and there are goals that come from both the midfield and out wide. So there's a number of players who kind of pitch in. There's a lot of options there. So from a tactical perspective, I think Rangers could be kind of quite busy over this tie, particularly the fullbacks and whoever Russell Martin chooses to play in midfield as well over the tie, because the transitions are kind of so important. At this level, games are won and lost solely on the transitions. Transitionary play is so important. I think it's one of the reasons why Nicky Hyen's prioritised that, philosophically in his domestic football as well, because he knows that it's equally important there. It transfers to European football. And European football is very different, but that step up, those 2 or 3 levels that you go up from domestic football to European football. In most leagues, to be fair, it's not just the same in Belgium and in Scotland, where there's a big step up with Europe. What you do with the ball in those transitions decides games, really. Possession-based football is something which is kind of on the wane now. It's all about really what you do with it. So do you have the players technically who are good enough to make things happen on those transitions and high turnovers? It's really all about choices. And this is again where your recruitment comes in and things like that. This is a very settled Bruges side. That's what I would say. There's a lot of players here who've been here for quite a while, are used to playing the way that they play. And I think I've started to become more comfortable with playing at this level as well. And obviously last November, they were in Glasgow. They played Celtic in the league phases of the Champions League, and they played really well that night. dominated, I would say, more than half of that game. You know, they came into an environment where they wouldn't be expected to dominate like that, and really grasped that game and controlled the majority of it. And were quite unlucky not to come away with a 2-1 win that night. They had a goal chopped off that was, you know, really marginal. You know, that's one of those VAR moments. Nobody really was really sure what was wrong with that until they had a very, very close look. But they played very well. So that's a real maturity, you know, at this level, being able to come into environments like Celtic Park and like Ibrox and actually play as if you are the home side, knowing very well that, you know, if you set the tempo and are able to dictate it, then that tends to quieten the crowd, and that obviously has a big psychological impact on a game after that. I think, you know, Rangers will have to play very well over the course of this tie. I think if they're going to get through it, they are arguably obviously slightly earlier in their preparation. So I think the big worry from a Rangers perspective is, has this tie perhaps come just a few weeks too early for them? But Nicky Hine, interestingly, when I spoke to him a few months ago, actually last time I saw him in person, we were talking a little bit around games very much of this nature, and he was talking about there's always a lot of noise in the media, a lot of opinions flying around about all sorts of things, you know, team selections and tactics and what's it like to play in that kind of environment. And he says, actually, you know, all that really matters is what happens when you cross that white line. That's all that you can control. So, and Russell Martin made a very similar point this week, actually, at his press conference, when he said, you know, people will have their opinions and they will always fly around, but actually, you know, it's about, you know, simple, clear instructions and relationships with players, and players really just kind of carrying out their roles properly, I suppose. If that happens, then, you know, you will have a really interesting, I think, an even game, because certainly looking at the whole tie contextually, I think Bruges probably are favourites. But it doesn't always work out that way when you cross the white lines.
In terms of then some of the players that the Rangers need to watch out for, Scott, we've already spoken a little bit about Van Aken and Ludovic Rice. Solis, the Greek international, certainly appears to be one of the kind of the star men for Bruges, but maybe anyone else that maybe slightly less heralded that could have a big impact on this tie over the two legs.
Yeah, well, there's a few. I mean, you mentioned Christophe Solis there. He's actually had a really good start to the season, 3 goals and 6 so far, and looks up for it at the moment. So he's enjoying himself. But a few others worth mentioning: Rafael Onyedika, who'll sit in the middle beside Van Aken, kind of classic box-to-box midfielder, really energetic, really physical. He's really in there to kind of break up the play, actually, and protect the offensive players and allow them maximum freedom to kind of get forward. The interesting thing about Rafael is he can get forward as well. So depending on the opposition, you know, he'll look to drive into space and kind of use that, although he does tend to sit a little bit deeper, but really strong physically. And I think in a game like this, you know, he's a player who could become kind of quite important. Simon Mignolet is worth mentioning as well, club's goalkeeper. Lots of people will remember his time. He was at Liverpool for a while, been at Club Brugge for a long time now. Although he's 37, he's still very much at the top of his game. Really good shot stopper, good positionally as a goalkeeper. Just short of 300 appearances now for Club Brugge as well. So he's a lot of experience at this level. He'll be important, I think, because he could potentially be busy over the course of the tie. So, you know, he could be involved in some of the key moments. Tends to perform well at big moments in games as well, good in one-on-ones. And somebody else who's incredibly experienced, who doesn't tend to get mentioned, so I'm going to mention him here, is Brandon Mekala. 32-year-old central defender, been with Club Brugge for a long time, bar a very small 6-month loan spell with another club in Belgium called St. Truden. If he plays today in the domestic league fixture and starts against Rangers, which I would expect him to start both games, the game at Ibrox will actually be his 500th appearance, I think, for Club Brugge. So quite a special night for him in lots of respects. But he's really good, excellent positioning, strong tackler, and he is that very rare thing in a central defender. He's actually ambidextrous, naturally right-footed, but over the course of years has taught taught himself to be able to play with his left foot, and he's just one of those players who never really gets the credit that he deserves, but is very influential in there. I think particularly with some of the younger players, the likes of Hans van Aken and Brandon Mekela as an influence are really important with these players in terms of communicating with them on the pitch and just helping them to develop to the standards that Club Brugge kind of expect kind of quickly. And you look to these players who've been around for a long time, who've been playing at this level for a long time as well, just to kind of help the younger players through these environments sometimes and through moments in games where things are maybe going against you as well. Those experienced heads really come into their own at those points. So and you mentioned Hans van Aken as well, who's always worth mentioning. Over 500 appearances for Club Brugge, I think 513 now. Really good reader of the game, technically a really good player, can play in a more offensive role as well as a bit deeper if necessary, and he has an extraordinarily good injury record as well, just injury free pretty much his entire career, and just just a really influential player. And he'll be, although he's not always overtly dangerous himself, he's always in the mix. So, he may start the move that results in the goal, but never get the credit for his role in the move. So a lot of Hans van Aken's work is kind of unsung, really. But those who watch him regularly will know that, he is capable of, really influencing a game and dictating what happens in it in a way that, I think is really underappreciated.
For all the Rangers fans watching this, Scott, give us some hope. Where are the weaknesses in this Club Brugge side that Rangers could potentially look to exploit over the two ties? Are there any?
I think there are. I think there are some. I think the central defence has been a weakness at Bruges, if there is a weakness. For a while, actually, that's not a new thing. So it'll be interesting to see who Nikica chooses to play there. Obviously, Mekela will certainly be one of the two that will play there. Jorn Spaliers might start as well. Relatively young central defender. So you'll benefit from having the experience of Mekela behind him. I think the important thing is that Rangers need to kind of try and take the initiative and really have a go and not slowly build their way into the game. I think the midfield is going to be incredibly important as well. Again, it's back to those transitions and kind of being direct about it as well. So I think Rangers have to look to use home advantage as well as much as possible in the first game. I think the worst possible scenario for Rangers would probably be conceding relatively early, because then inevitably what you'll find is Rangers pushing on to try and get back into the game, and that will open the game up more from a Bruges perspective, and from the transitions, then that's not a good place you want to be in. I mean, Celtic had that problem last November in the Champions League with Bruges scoring first. They tried to get back into the game, and actually that created even more space for Bruges. So I think it'd be important for Rangers to try and get ahead in the game at whatever point that is, because that, I think, will give them a tactical advantage as well.
Gets the crowd on the side as well, because what you may not have noticed from a distance is that there's quite a bit of discontent in and around Ibrox already so far this season. A slow start to the league season hasn't helped, and Russell Martin wasn't necessarily the first choice by the vast majority of the Rangers support, so he doesn't have that credit in the bank that really anyone else coming in would be afforded to 6 weeks into the job. So I think you're quite right on that. An early goal for Bruges would really take a lot of the air and the atmosphere out of Ibrox, which can be a big leveler in terms of these big European nights. And you think back to the European runs of the last 2-3 years, Ibrox has been a big part of those evenings and a big part of why Rangers have been able to build a bit of momentum and be able to do so well, particularly at Ibrox over the last kind of 2-3 years. As a Belgian podcast, Scott, would be remiss not to speak about Rangers Player of the Year last year, Nico Rashkin. He's been in and out of the side so far under Russell Martin this season. A lot of rumours linking him with a potential move away from Rangers. I think for this player trading model to work very well for us, he's kind of at the top end of his curve at the moment if he doesn't sign a new contract. But obviously, recently getting into the Belgian national side and being quite an integral part in how they've played over the last kind of 2 or 3 internationals. So what's the Belgian take on what Nico's future looks like?
Well, very well respected player in Belgium, I think, who has a bright future ahead of him. I think, you mentioned, him perhaps being at the high point of his kind of resale value probably just now, which I think from Rangers' perspective is probably true. I think it's unlikely there will be a new deal for him. So the resale peak probably is now during this window, I think. It's interesting that he's been in and out of the side a little bit as well. I think, Russell Martin's spoken about, how much he admires kind of Nico Raskin. I think, he appreciates, his technical ability. I think there's perhaps a little bit of unsurety as to where he might fit into Russell's system, where the best place might be for him to play, because during his time at his Rangers, he's played quite a lot of that time out of his best natural position, I think, which is on the right of midfield. Although, of course, he can play in 2 or 3 positions, like all good players kind of can do. He's had he's real impact at international level recently as well. Rudy Garcia seems to like him. He's come in and changed a couple of games as well, which has helped kind of, I think, cement his relationship with the new coach of the Red Devils. I've been a little bit surprised, along with a lot of other Belgian analysts, about the kind of lack of interest in him from a transfer perspective. I think there's a lot of people watching him, but nobody seems kind of quite ready to make a move for him yet, which is kind of surprising. I think he is a player, obviously, who can have impact at this level. And Rangers have been lucky enough to play quite a number of Belgian sides in recent years, actually. Over the last 3 or 4 years, they've met Belgian opposition a lot. Obviously, a number of players who've come through clubs in Belgium have been at Rangers. Belgian manager as well, recently, and Philippe Clement as well. So Rangers have quite a big connection with Belgium in recent years. And the market in Belgium is very strong for developing young players. So Belgium is one of the countries where you will get good value for good young players as well. So it's a good place to go and do your shopping. And I think Rangers recognise that through some of their own acquisitions and dealings over the last 2 or 3 years. But yeah, I mean, Raskin is a player who could have an impact on this tie. Not sure whether Cyril Dessers, I'll throw him in there as well, because he's a big relationship with Belgium. Will be able to, don't know quite how bad his injury is yet. Not as bad as it first looked, it seems.
Certainly appears, but I think Tuesday might be a little quick for him, but certainly the away leg in Bruges next week, I think, could be a lot more suitable for Dessers to come back into. I think it's interesting with Cyril Dessers. He's much maligned, but he scores a lot of goals. But I don't necessarily think he's a natural fit for the way Russell Martin wants to play either, because he's not a traditional kind of hold it up striker. And that, I think, when you're playing the way Martin wants to play, I think you need a focal point, and I don't necessarily think any of Rangers strikers at the moment are that type of player. Interesting to see if Hamzy Gaman gets any minutes today in the League Cup game against Allo Athletic to maybe build him a little bit up ahead of the game on Tuesday night, because I've got concerns about all 3 of kind of Rangers strikers. Gaman's not played a great deal of minutes this year. Danilo's been in and out, and obviously coming back from a very injury hit season last year. I think technically can score goals, but again isn't a natural fit for that kind of hold up type striker, but he does have a bit more energy about him than Cyril Dessers. So it's a bit of a mismatch, and unsurprisingly, I think Rangers are looking for a striker at the moment, but I think a lot of it will be dependent on getting one out the door, whether it's Igaman going to France, which has been very heavily linked over the summer, but I think fitness has maybe prevented that from happening so far. And obviously Dessers was highly linked with a move to Greece, which hasn't quite materialised, and like all the noise seems to be that he'll probably still be at Rangers for this season.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing Billy Dodds recently, actually, talking about his own respect for Cyril Dessers. He was saying that, he's a model for a lot of the young players at Rangers, because, he does tend to go out after training and do a lot of personal work. aspects of his game. So I think he's been his influence off the park with some of the younger players, I think, is something that, some of the coaching staff, and even Barry Ferguson recently, was very complimentary about. He may be in and out of the side and not necessarily first choice, but he's actually quite a big influence on some of the players in the camp, the experienced players, but particularly the younger players who I think have learnt kind of quite a lot of his approach to improving themselves and their application. So I think in that sense he's certainly been a real role model for them. It'll be interesting to see who Russell Martin does choose to play up front, actually, because I think that will definitely have a bearing on how this tie could go. But again, I think the tie will come back to those Nicky Hyen comments about what happens when you cross that white line. All the noise around the game ultimately stops at that point, and it becomes about kind of players executing the game plan and carrying out their own individual instructions properly. And it's interesting hearing Russell Martin recently, particularly talking about some of the domestic fixtures. That's where some of his disappointment has come, with players who've perhaps not quite fulfilled the game plan to the extent that that he would have liked. And the details at this level become really important. So yeah, it's a big tie for both clubs, I think, because there's a lot riding on it.
Changing tact ever so slightly, Scott, just while we've got you on, from a Belgian football perspective, obviously Union Saint-Gilloise have been a massive success story over the last kind of 5 years or so in Belgian football. Tony Bloom, obviously his investment in USG, just recently put a lot of money into Hearts, and he's been very vocal in terms of his hopes for Hearts for this season. They've started the season very well in Scotland, but from what you've seen in Belgium, with what his investment and his analytical access to players has done for a team like USG, just how worried should teams like Rangers and Celtic be about what the potential is for Hearts to do under Tony Bloom's kind of watch?
Well, this is a really interesting debate, this one, I think, which has been raging for a few weeks now, and will kind of go on for a while yet. The question of whether Hearts can disrupt Celtic and Rangers because of Tony Bloom's influence and the data set from his Star Lizard system, as it's called. Yeah, I mean, my feeling about this is this can work. I see no reason why the disruption that's been much touted could happen at some point. Whether it translates into, a serious title challenge or not is a different matter. But could Hearts push both Celtic and Rangers much harder? Could they win something because of this? Yeah, I see absolutely no reason why not. I think, I've heard people saying, well, all clubs are using data, so how is this really going to make any difference? It's not really the fact that they're using data, it's about how they use the data and how they implement it. That's the thing. And actually, this system has been proven to work. It's worked within Brighton in England in the Premier League. It's worked for Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium as well. But the reason it's worked is because of the people behind the data, if you like. So the people in the key footballing operations roles, the sporting directors, in particular, because they're the ones that make the kind of key decisions, they've got this very right at both Brighton and Union Saint-Gilloise, and that's the thing. Now, Graham Jones at Hearts, I know Graham a little bit, spent a little bit of time with him. Graham knows the team at Union Saint-Gilloise, obviously. He knows Tony, so he knows how this system works. So there is a sense that given a little bit of time, I think this could have impact. There's no doubt about it. What this recruitment really is about identifying players that other clubs may have missed, who are hungry and who fit the model as well. So in Union Saint-Gilloise's case, what they've been extremely good at over the last 4 to 5 years consistently, because they've got very little wrong with their recruitment, most of their choices have really produced the goods, has been not only finding the right players for the right positions, But they also scout for personality. That's how I would describe it as well. So it's not just about what they bring in the football pitch; it's about what the individual brings into the club. What's their personality like? So there's a lot of work that goes into kind of due diligence, someone's background, their character as well. You know what I mean? What's that added value that you're bringing into a club that goes on top of their footballing ability, that added extra that you can't find, and it's something that a lot of clubs surprisingly still aren't doing. You know what I mean? They're still focusing on purely the footballing aspects of their recruitment, but there's other aspects around modern recruitment now that are equally important, that go hand in hand with that, and that's something that the Union Saint-Gilloise really have kind of struck gold with, knowing what your club is, what your club's identity is, what's the culture of that club, right? Who fits that? What are the values that go with that? What are the values that represent that and embody that and can help us punch above our weight, both on and off the pitch as well? Because the thing about football, I think, is winning on the pitch is very important, but there's a whole range of things off the pitch, in terms of the way people behave and the way they interact with other people, with the media and with the fan base, that are part of the job. You know, it's not just about what you do when you're, you know, you pull on a top and you go on a pitch as well. You're always representing a club everywhere you go, and those values transfer. So, you know, it's about so much more than simply footballing ability, and that's where the scouting system and this data kind of comes in. It's about that much bigger holistic picture. And Tony's a betting man, famously, literally. So I think he likes a challenge. And I think obviously he sees the potential in a club like Hearts. He sees, you know, Hearts as a club who probably should be achieving much more than they have done for a long time. And the same is true of Union Saint-Gilloise. You know, he came in there, bought Union Saint-Gilloise with his business partner at that time, Alex Muzio, who's now the majority shareholder. Tony has no day-to-day involvement at Union, other than, you know, turning up to enjoy some games at the Marion in Brussels from time to time. Yeah, and he likes a project. I think the idea of coming in and being able to disrupt things is hugely attractive to him. And I think if you apply this data in the right way, then it can have an impact. Because yeah, sure, Celtic and Rangers are using data, but here's the thing: Celtic and Rangers, I think, have been notoriously poor at implementing what the data's telling them for a long time. This isn't new, so their recruitment has been questionable. I think they've both had successes, but the interesting thing, if you look at this data and the model that Union Saint-Gilloise have used, and how Brighton have employed it, and they've used it in a slightly different way because they play differently to Union Saint-Gilloise, but yeah, it's about interpreting the data and using it in the right way. It's not simply about following what the data says. And I think if you do that and you match the right coach to that, then you're onto a winner. And Union Saint-Gilloise have done that consistently over the last 4 or 5 years, and that's what's allowed them to build this head of steam to a point where they obviously won the title last year, and probably would have won at least one more over the last 3 or 4 years, but for luck going against them very narrowly. And it's just a really good example of what can happen with a club that are really kind of quite small, a modest football club really in many respects, who've gone on this kind of stratospheric rise on and off the pitch, because of good footballing people behind the scenes making good decisions. And how you interpret the data and then apply it is kind of the main part of that. Interestingly, as an aside as well, I did see a very interesting conversation recently on Sky Sports. It was Chris Boyd was talking with Chris Sutton about whether they can disrupt Celtic and Rangers, and I think Chris Boyd obviously has had a look at what's been happening in Belgium and seen that actually it can work if applied right. So his questions have been around, okay, who's making the decisions and what decisions are they actually making? Because all of the tools there, you know, to strike gold are there. It's just people have been making the wrong decisions, and I think he sees now a system at Hearts where, do you know what, they could go and do something now. So Celtic and Rangers should be a little bit concerned about this, because having more money doesn't guarantee anything. And, the fact that they've had more has kind of proved that, that data can create value for it if you use it properly. And the early indications from a Hearts perspective are kind of quite positive. I think the recruitment's been quite good. It's just, can they, over the course of time, can they get results in the big games against Celtic and Rangers? Because they're the games that will make the margins. Hearts could quite easily go on a consistent run and beat a lot of other sides domestically in Scotland, but what will make the difference is whether they can go to Celtic Park and Ibrox and win there more often as well. If they can do that, then Hearts will be in with a chance of really squeezing both Celtic and Rangers.
Yeah, we'll see what happens over the course of the season. Loads of coverage of the Rangers Club Brugge game over the next 10 days here on the Fourth Official, but also over on your platform as well, Scott, I'm sure. If people haven't been familiar with what you do with the Belgian Football Podcast, where can they find you and what's on offer?
Yep, I'm part of the three-man team who produce the Belgian Football Podcast, which is the #1 English language podcast covering all of Belgian football. So if you're looking to find out more about Belgian football and even follow it from afar, then the Belgian Football Podcast is probably the place to come. We're not club specific, so we're interested in everybody. So most weeks we produce a show that's around an hour and a quarter that tends to cover all the latest news and action each week in Belgium. And we also like to do special episodes as well throughout the course of the season, where we get guests on from inside clubs to do kind of deeper dives into an aspect of what's going on inside those clubs too. So yeah, you'll be able to find us on your kind of podcasting platform of choice as well, and on social media.
Yep. Big thank you to Scott for giving up his time to come and give us a bit of the inside track into what Rangers can expect from Club Brugge over the next 10 days or so. I think it's fair to say it's going to be a very interesting tie. As a Rangers fan myself, I hope that it matches the fixtures from 92-93. It was my first season as a Rangers season ticket holder, so if we can replicate that, then I think we'll all leave here quite happily. And interestingly, Scott Nisbet, who was the big hero for Rangers the last time Brugge came to Ibrox in a competitive game, he spoke to us on the Fourth Official earlier on this week, and the big video of that interview dropped here on the YouTube channel earlier on today. So please go and check that out if you've not yet seen it. But yeah, thank you to Scott. Drop the Belgian Football Podcast a follow, and we'll speak to you next time here on the Fourth Official. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.